Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Thank you for tuning in. This week I want to talk about a car I have a bit of a love-hate relationship. Now, the reason why I love this car was this was really the first tuner car I've ever had. This was a car that got me introduced to turbos and blow-off valves and fuel management and pretty much taught me everything I need to know to work on the cars that I've had since. The reason why I hate the car is, well, it is probably the worst engineered car I've ever had. So this week I want to talk about what it was like to own and daily drive the Mitsubishi Eclipse GSX. Oh, and stick around to the end of the video. I have a special announcement for everybody. To get started talking about the Eclipse, I first want to talk about, the different generations and, the different performance packages that they came with. This video is mainly going to focus on the second generation Eclipse because, well, that's what I had. And in my opinion, that was probably one of the best generations of Eclipse. Now, the first generation of Eclipse is also a really good car for certain reasons. I'll talk about that a little bit later in the video. And of course, from the third generation on up, in my opinion, they really kind of got away from the performance aspect of the car, kind of became a cute little commuter sports car, really nothing that impressive. So I'm just going to talk about the first two generations. Now, in the second generation Eclipse, there was a couple different performance packages. You had the RS and the GS, which was the non-turbo front-wheel drive application. And, really, they were just that. They're a little sports car, non-turbo, put down some okay power. Then, if you could step up into the GST, that was the turbocharged front-wheel drive application. And if you were really lucky and could find a GSX, which is what I had, you had a turbocharged all-wheel drive car. And that was really a great thing, especially for my first tuner car. Interestingly enough, the non-turbo car comes with the 420A engine. And for those of you that have seen the first Fast and Furious, when Brian pops the hood on his green Eclipse, that's actually what he has. He actually has a non-turbo Eclipse. The turbo version came with the 4G63 engine, which is actually the same engine that came in the Evos at the time. So for a lot less, you were getting basically an Evo because it had the all-wheel drive and the same engine. I wasn't aware of this until I actually popped the hood on an Evo though, because I was aware it was the same engine. But for some reason, between the Eclipse and the Evo, the engine is rotated 180 degrees. So it does have different heads between the two applications. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. I'm not quite sure why they rotated the engine like they did. And since I've already mentioned the engines, might as well start talking about the car from there. In all my time of working on and building import tuner cars, I have never come across an engine more horribly engineered than that 4G63 engine. I mean, in the time that I had my Eclipse, I had to replace that engine 3 times. Part of the reasons why I had to replace the engine was at one point in time, the balance shaft froze on me. At another point in time, my timing belt jumped teeth. And of course, there is the dreaded crank walk. So it's just a horribly engineered engine. However, if you do run into that engine with your second generation Eclipse, something you might want to consider doing is actually getting an engine out of the first generation Eclipse. Now, they're both 4G63 engines, and for some reason, the first generation Eclipse came with Eagle forged pistons and rods, which means it's a stronger engine. For some reason, the second generation Eclipse just came with standard pistons and rods, which means it can't handle as much horsepower. Which is why a lot of people, when their engine goes bad in their second generation, they'll buy an engine out of a first generation. Now, the first generation Eclipse engine is often referred to as a 6-bolt because it has 6 bolts on the flywheel, where the second generation Eclipse is a 7-bolt because it has 7 bolts on the flywheel. Now, just because you do get a first generation Eclipse engine, it's not completely immune to the issues that the 4G63 engine has. For example, like the lash adjusters, the opening on them is too small. But that's an easy enough fix. You can actually pick up lash adjusters out of a third generation Eclipse, drop them in. That has a much bigger opening to get oil flow, and they're not going to stick. You can also remove your balance shaft when you swap out, which is a good idea, but you will still have to worry about the ever-famous Eclipse crank walk. These engines are notorious for getting crank walk. Talk to anybody who's had one. They'll talk about they're always in fear of the crank walk. One thing I've got to say about having the Eclipse and why it was such a great first tuner car was the aftermarket support for the car was phenomenal. Now granted, this was back in 2002 where the car was a little bit newer. Now in 2021, since it's been out of production for so long, I'm not sure if it still has the aftermarket support. It did, but there was a lot of options. You know, you could get any type of suspension you wanted for it. Turbo systems were easy to go with. I personally went with an Evo 3 big 16G turbo because it was just a nice direct swap in. It, you know, it's still kind of Mitsubishi turbo. Suspension wise, you could still pretty much do whatever you want. I ran Tokiko Aluminas with H&R progressive springs because back then coilovers were way more expensive than they are now. For fuel management, this was kind of a fun thing because I was there kind of at the turn of technology. My first experience in tuning fuel curves was with what was called a GM MAF translator, where the car ran on an MAF and you got an MAF out of a GM car, and you had this little box with some rotating dials that would alter the signal on its way to the computer, and that's how you would tune your fuel curves. I was literally sitting there with an old Palm Pilot, for those of you who know what that is, looking at fuel curves and trying to tune on the freeway using little dials and knobs. By the time I got rid of the car, the DSM Link had come out, which was really the first major standalone fuel management system, at least for the DSMs. For those of you who didn't know, because I didn't talk about it earlier, DSM is the general reference to the Mitsubishi Eclipse, the Eagle Talon, and the Dodge Laser, because they are all the same car, bolt for bolts. When you put their logos together, you get the Diamond Star Motor Corporation, which is why they're the same car. Anyways, the DSM Link was specially tailored to DSMs, and it was a great standalone fuel management system for that car. Now, I do have to say that I still think the Mitsubishi Eclipse is a good looking car. In my opinion, it took some of its exterior design cues from the Supra and the RX-7. You put all three of these cars together and you can see that they're all from the same era. They share that same kind of rounded look hatch that I personally enjoy. Unfortunately, I don't have any pictures of my car because when I had my Eclipse, it was about 2002, and digital cameras were these big things that were a 3.2 megapixel, and any picture I had of the Eclipse was up on MySpace, and we all know what's going on with MySpace. It doesn't really exist. So unfortunately, I don't have any pictures of the car, but it was white. Yes, it had a big black aluminum spoiler because Fast and Furious had just come out. The engine bay had been cleaned up nice. I had my valve cover was powder coated candy blue with polished raised lettering. So I definitely went all out with that car. The interior of the car also feels like it took a lot of its inspiration from the RX-7 and the Supra. If you take a look at the dash, it also has that wraparound dash that I absolutely love when it comes to sports cars. It was actually a very roomy interior. You know, it felt like it had a lot of elbow room despite the size of the car. The seats were fairly comfortable. Of course, I did my usual thing where I swapped them out for Sparcos before I had sold the car because, you know, a little bit of brand loyalty. But all in all, it was a very comfortable interior. Of course, at the time, you know, I was in my early 20s, so the back seats never got used. The back seat was constantly folded down. The rear hatch has plenty of storage space. I never had an issue hauling stuff around. Granted, at the time, I wasn't exactly carrying a lot of stuff with me. I was more concerned about saving weight and making the car as light and as fast as I could. As for working on the car, I've got to say it was a pretty easy car to work on. I mean, let's be honest, it had to have been. This was the car I learned how to be a mechanic, which means I knew absolutely nothing about working on cars before I started having to work on this one. And of course, like I said, you know, with how often it's going to be broken down, you are going to get the practice in. There's actually enough space in that engine bay to do a lot of the work you need to do with the engine in the car. Now, of course, if you have to pull the engine, I did it 3 times. It was actually a very easy engine to pull. So if you are looking at a car that you can work on yourself, this is definitely a car you can work on. The only time it kind of became a little bit complicated is because it's an all-wheel drive and there's a transfer case attached to the transmission, but the transfer case actually unbolts from the transmission if you need to do that. So I definitely got to say, easy car to work on if that's what you're looking for. As for the car being a daily driver, this also goes to the love-hate relationship I have with the Eclipse GSX. I think the car would be a great daily driver for some reasons, and an absolutely horrible daily driver for one specific reason. One of the reasons why I think the car would actually be a great daily driver is because it's just a very usable car. You know, as I said before, there's plenty of space in the interior. It's very comfortable. When you make modifications to the car, the power is very usable, so you don't have to worry about getting into trouble. And of course, it has that all-wheel drive system. When I had my Eclipse, I actually lived in Oregon, which means I was dealing with rain and the occasional snow, and that all-wheel drive system will really save you if you get yourself into trouble. The other cool thing is, because it has an all-wheel drive too, is if you take it to a drag strip like I used to, I'd go up to Portland International Raceway, the car has no tire spin. Like when you let off the clutch, you know, you're right off the line, which could really save you if you have to deal with a hole shot. So I heavily recommend the car strictly for the idea that it has the all-wheel drive system, easy to work on, and it's not so powerful you're gonna get yourself into trouble. The one reason why I would not recommend this car as a daily driver is just those reliability issues. You are going to drive this car and constantly wonder what's going to break next. So I would recommend, if you're going to pick up an Eclipse GSX or an Eagle Talon TSI or even a Dodge Laser, probably not best to use it as your daily, you know, or at least have a secondary car on standby for when inevitably something's going to break and you're going to have to repair it. I know that I was finding myself having to fix something at least once a month on that car just to keep it on the road. And there it is. That was my experience owning and daily driving a Mitsubishi Eclipse GSX. Now, at the beginning of the video, I did say I was going to make an announcement for those of you who made it to the end. And actually, I have 3. The first announcement is we have broken 500 subscribers. I want to send a massive thank you out to all my loyal viewers and subscribers for getting me here. I could not have done this without you. The other announcement I want to make is, because I have broken 500 subscribers, I've decided to open up a JD Archer shop. If you'd like to support this channel, go to jdarcher.bigcartel.com and take a look at what I have. I've created a few t-shirts, hats, beanies, and a hoodie, and there's more designs on the way. The third thing I want to announce is I have now become an Amazon affiliate. I did this to kind of help out you viewers. If you go back to my previous videos where I show you how to work on the car, whether it was replacing the expansion valve in the Supra or the back seat repair, or doing the oil change, spark plugs, or brakes on the GTR, if you go back to those videos, I now have links to all the tools I use to get that job done, as well as the materials used. So if that's a project you need to do, it's really easy for you to make sure you have everything, so when you get started, you're not all of a sudden finding out you're missing like a torque wrench or a Allen head socket. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button to let me know. It does help the channel out a lot. If you want to see more GTR content in the future, go and subscribe to my channel. You can now follow me on all forms of social media, which include Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. I'll leave links to those in the description down below. If you feel there's anything I've missed, or you have any questions about the Mitsubishi Eclipse, go ahead and post in the comments section. I will respond to you. I thank you all for watching, and until next time, forget everything else, focus on the finish line.